They said she was gone, shot down, lost to the war. But 9 months later, on a blistering runway in Bugramm, a single jet appeared on the horizon, flown by the ghost no one thought would ever return. The air over Bugramm shimmered with heat, the sort that made the horizon quiver like a mirage. On the tarmac, Colonel Mason paced with clipped, deliberate steps, his voice cutting through the stillness like steel. The order he'd given had been simple, almost offhand. Any aircraft will do, but in war nothing is ever careless. And then it came, the low, thunderous growl of twin turbofan engines rising from beyond the ridge. Mason froze mid-step as the unmistakable silhouette of an A-10 Thunderbolt tore into view, bearing down fast. At its controls was the last person he ever expected to see again. Captain Elise Hartman had been gone for 9 months, shot down over hostile territory, presumed dead. Her name had slipped quietly into the shadows of missing reports, her memory already folded away with official condolence letters. Mason himself had signed hers. Yet here she was, piloting that stubborn, ugly, beautiful beast of a jet, the kind built to take a beating and still limp home. The sound arrived first, a deep, relentless rumble that shook the very ground. Soldiers along the flight line turned instinctively, hands raised against the glare. A murmur rippled through the ranks like wind stirring dry grass. Some dared whisper her name, others wouldn't. Mason's jaw clenched as the A-10 drew nearer, its wings heavy with ordnance, its nose-mounted cannon a silent, hulking threat. For Elise, every second of that descent stretched into eternity. She saw the familiar sprawl of concrete and dust below, but also the faces of the villagers who had risked everything to hide her, to keep her alive, to see her safely to the extraction point. She thought she would never look upon her unit again. She had been wrong. The A-10 struck the runway hard, tires shrieking, dust curling up in its wake. Elise's hands trembled as she coaxed the aircraft to a stop. The canopy hissed open, sunlight pouring in. For a long moment, she didn't move. She simply breathed, steady, measured, and let the sting of jet fuel remind her she was alive. Mason was the first to step forward. Each stride felt weighted, as though his boots were forged from lead. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to demand explanations. But beneath the rigid frame, something else smoldered, guilt. He had given up on her. Around them, the air grew taut, charged. Soldiers who had stared down firefights without flinching now stood rooted. One sergeant muttered under his breath, "That's Hartman. It can't be." Another crossed himself in silence. When Elise finally climbed down, her movements were careful, deliberate, as though the earth itself might vanish under her boots. Her flight suit hung looser than before. The sun had etched new lines about her eyes, but her gaze was tempered steel. "You said any jet will do, Colonel," she murmured, her voice steady though her throat ached with emotion. "So I brought you one that doesn't give up." The words landed heavy, heavier than any gunfire. Mason's reply came after a pause. "I thought you were gone." "I was," she admitted, "but not everyone lets go that easily." Her eyes flicked briefly to the gathered soldiers before returning to his. "Sometimes you fight to come home, sometimes home fights for you." He wanted a salute. Instead, he stepped aside, allowing the others to approach. There was no cheer, no applause, only a ripple of quiet respect. Hands touched her shoulder. Nods were exchanged. A soft voice, "Welcome back, ma'am." But war doesn't pause for reunions. Hours later, Mason stood again on the line, watching her lift into the skis once more, this time on a close air support run for a platoon pinned in the mountains. Every maneuver in that cockpit was defiance in motion, poetry writ in steel and smoke. As she banked toward the horizon, he knew he had underestimated not just her, but the raw will to endure. Because courage never truly disappears. It waits, and it returns. And somewhere in the wavering heat above the runway, the memory replayed. A lone aircraft breaking the horizon, carrying a ghost who refused to remain buried, and a truth too heavy to deny. If stories like this stir something in you, do subscribe, and share this with someone who believes in fighting their way home. And tell me, in the comments below, if you had just one chance to come back, who would you come back for?